People talk about identity as if it begins at birth, as if the first breath starts the first truth. But long before a body, there is a signature, a primary frequency that your oversoul carries as its most stable pattern. That pattern is not a personality and not a belief, because it existed before any preference could form. It is a way of moving through reality, a recurring bias towards certain kinds of clarity, and it shows up in every incarnation as a repeating undertone. The problem is that most people only notice the undertone after it has already shaped their entire life. You have probably heard language like purpose, destiny, mission, and path. But those words are too large and too vague to be useful. A signature tone is smaller than destiny and sharper than purpose, because it is the foundational resonance that makes your choices feel like your choices. It is the internal yes that appears before your reasoning arrives. The internal no that persists even when you try to override it. It determines what kind of truth feels nourishing to you, and what kind feels hollow, even when both are socially approved. It is not morality, it is coherence. An objection rises immediately, because the mind hears foundational resonance and assumes determinism. It imagines a script already written, and it fears being trapped inside a pre-selected identity. That fear is logical, because many systems use labels to reduce people, and a reduced human becomes easy to manage. But a signature tone is not a label placed on you. It is a field that you already are, and it does not remove choice. It shapes the terrain where your choices matter, and terrain is not the same thing as a cage. Another objection hides under the first one and tries to sound practical. If signature tones are real, why does everyone not feel them clearly? And why do people change so dramatically over time? The answer cannot be comforting, because it forces you to admit how much of your current self is adaptation rather than essence. Most people do feel their tone early. Then they build defenses over it to survive their environment. The tone remains, but it becomes harder to detect because the life strategy becomes louder than the original frequency. There are 3 ways to approach signature tones without collapsing into mythology or oversimplification. The first vector is structural, meaning you look at what your oversoul repeats regardless of situation, not the events, but the recurring way you respond to events. The recurring type of tension you cannot ignore. Some people repeat refinement, always trying to make things cleaner, clearer, truer. Some people repeat expansion, always testing the edge of what is possible, always resisting stagnation. Some people repeat integration, always combining opposites, always seeking synthesis rather than victory. The second vector is emotional, because signature tone produces a specific kind of longing, not a craving for pleasure, but a hunger for a certain quality of reality. One person longs for precision and becomes restless in vague spaces. Another longs for depth and becomes numb in shallow conversation. Another longs for freedom and becomes ill inside systems that demand compliance. These longings are not random desires. They are signals from the oversoul field pulling the fragment toward environments that allow the tone to express itself without distortion. A predictable objection appears here, because longing can also come from trauma, and you do not want to misread pain as destiny. That objection is necessary, because spiritual spaces often turn wounds into identities. So the distinction matters. Trauma longing feels compulsive, urgent, and narrowing, while signature longing feels steady, persistent, and expanding, even when it is uncomfortable. Trauma seeks relief, tone seeks coherence, and the difference becomes clear when you watch what happens after you get what you thought you wanted. The third vector is conceptual, because signature tone produces a consistent relationship with meaning itself. Some people are built to challenge inherited frameworks and cannot stop seeing contradictions in collective beliefs. Some people are built to preserve sacred structure and feel an instinct to protect what works from reckless change. Some people are built to explore paradox and feel most alive when certainty collapses into a wider truth. These are not roles assigned by society. They are oversoul biases that express through intellect, intuition, and the way you interpret reality. If you want a clean test, you will be disappointed because signature tone is subtle and your life is noisy. It is easy to confuse tone with mood, identity, or temporary obsession. It is easy to confuse tone with the persona you built to earn approval. This is why the Oversoul does not hand you the answer in one moment, because instant certainty would become a mask. Instead, the tone reveals itself through friction, through repeated moments where you cannot betray something inside you without feeling internal collapse. Another unspoken objection arrives because this feels unfair. If the tone is real and stable, why would the Oversoul hide it behind friction, doubt, and misdirection? The answer is that the Oversoul does not hide it. The fragment hides it, because immediate access would let the ego perform alignment without earning it. When alignment is earned, it becomes capacity rather than self-description. The Oversoul values capacity because capacity survives stress, while self-description dissolves when pressure rises. Signature tone also explains why two people can study the same teachings and walk away with opposite conclusions, both claiming truth. They are filtering information through different frequency needs. A person with a refinement tone will extract methods and structure. A person with an expansion tone will extract possibility and permission. A person with an integration tone will extract synthesis and relational harmony. This is not relativism. It is a demonstration that consciousness selects the nutrients it requires. At this point, it is tempting to stabilize into a tidy list of tone categories, but that would poison the episode. Lists create premature certainty, and premature certainty blocks recognition. A signature tone is not an archetype you choose. It is a pattern you discover by observing what persists when everything else changes. Your career can change. Your relationships can change. Your beliefs can flip. Your style can transform. But the inner requirement stays the same. The requirement is the tone. Another objection appears, more confrontational this time. If the Oversoul has an original frequency, does that mean growth is limited, as if you can only become more of what you already are? That fear assumes the tone is a boundary, but the tone is a direction of development, not a ceiling. A refinement tone can evolve from perfectionism into sacred discernment. An expansion tone can evolve from chaos into intelligent exploration. An integration tone can evolve from people-pleasing into true synthesis that does not betray truth. Now the real pressure begins, because signature tone is not only about preference, it is about responsibility. If your tone is real, then your suffering has information in it, and your coping strategies are not neutral. Every time you abandon the tone to gain comfort, you trade coherence for temporary relief. Every time you obey the tone under pressure, you generate stable identity, and that identity becomes portable across lifetimes. This is why the Oversoul cares about tone more than outcome, because outcomes vary with environment, but tone becomes internal structure. Here is a detail most people do not want to hear. Many of your life problems are not problems in the event sense, they are problems in the alignment sense. You can be successful and still feel wrong. You can be loved and still feel off. You can be safe and still feel restless. That restlessness is not entitlement. It is the Oversoul field signaling that the signature frequency is being violated. An objection comes up because this sounds like spiritual narcissism, as if discomfort means you are special. That objection is healthy because many people inflate themselves using metaphysical language. But signature tone does not make you superior. It makes you specific. And specificity can be inconvenient. A signature tone often forces you to lose social approval, change environments, or disappoint people who benefited from your compliance. If you are using tone language to feel elevated, you are not listening to tone, you are listening to ego. Signature tone also clarifies why certain teachings activate you, while others leave you cold, even when they are true for someone else. You are not rejecting truth. You are rejecting a frequency mismatch. Your Oversoul is seeking an angle of truth that builds your specific structure. This is why the same spiritual concept can be liberating for one person and suffocating for another. The concept is not the final authority. The tone is the calibrator that determines how concepts are digested. Now the narrative has to confront the most destabilizing implication. If signature tone is Oversoul original frequency, then the Oversoul itself has an identity that is not generic oneness. That idea threatens the comfort of spiritual sameness. It threatens the belief that individuality is only illusion. But an Oversoul is not a blank light. It is a coherent light with a distinct pattern, and the pattern is what allows it to contribute something unique to the larger field of consciousness. An objection surfaces here because individuality has been used to justify separation, hierarchy, and conflict. People fear that affirming unique oversoul frequency will produce spiritual elitism. The risk is real, because humans turn difference into ranking when they are insecure. But uniqueness does not require hierarchy. Uniqueness is simply the fact that different frequencies do different work. An oversoul that carries refinement is not above an oversoul that carries expansion, because both are solving different problems in the larger architecture. So how do you feel your signature tone without turning it into a story? You stop asking what you want, and you start asking what makes you internally coherent. You notice what kind of decision produces a clean inner silence afterward, even if it costs you externally. You notice what kind of compromise produces inner noise that persists for days, even if it wins you approval. Tone is detected through after effects, not through immediate pleasure. This is also why signature tone cannot be reduced to preference. Preference changes with mood and environment. Tone remains constant and becomes louder under pressure. When life tightens, what you truly are emerges because the nervous system cannot afford performance. Under stress, the fragment defaults to its deepest pattern, and that pattern reveals the oversoul frequency more accurately than any meditation. If you want certainty too early, you will choose the wrong tone and build your identity on an aesthetic. Aesthetic tone feels inspiring but collapses when challenged. Real tone feels unavoidable, sometimes even irritating, because it does not care about your image. It will drive you toward integrity, not toward comfort, and it will keep pushing until you stop negotiating with it. The oversoul does not punish you for delay, but delay has consequence, because coherence deferred becomes complexity later. The closing tension is not whether you have a signature tone. The tension is whether you are willing to obey it when it costs you something, because the moment you name the tone, you become accountable to it, and accountability removes the fantasy that your life is random. The Oversoul original frequency is not a mystical badge. It is an operating principle, and it will keep showing itself through the same friction, until you either integrate it or keep paying the price of ignoring it. The signature tone does not become clearer with belief. It becomes clearer with exposure to consequence. Most people try to locate it through introspection alone. But introspection without pressure only reveals preference, not structure. The Oversoul original frequency is forged in how you behave when clarity costs you something, because cost strips away performance. When the environment demands compromise, and you feel a specific kind of inner resistance that does not fade with reasoning, that resistance is not stubbornness. It is the tone asserting its boundary. This is where many misinterpret the signal and label it trauma or fear. Trauma speaks in urgency and collapse. Tone speaks in steadiness and insistence. Trauma says escape now. Tone says this is not aligned even if you survive it. The distinction becomes visible only when you watch what happens after the choice is made. Trauma-driven avoidance produces relief followed by emptiness. Tone-aligned action produces tension followed by coherence. The after effect is the diagnostic, not the emotion during the choice. A deeper objection emerges here because this framing threatens spiritual neutrality. If tone alignment matters this much, then not all paths are equally valid for every fragment. That feels dangerous in a culture that equates inclusivity with sameness, but sameness is not inclusion. Inclusion is allowing distinct frequencies to exist without forcing convergence. The Oversoul does not seek uniform enlightenment. It seeks differentiated coherence, because a field composed of identical solutions cannot adapt when conditions change. Signature tone also explains why advice so often fails. Guidance that saved one person can quietly corrode another. A discipline that grounds one fragment can suffocate another. A philosophy that liberates one Oversoul line can destabilize another. This is not because truth is subjective, but because truth is directional. It must be approached from the angle that strengthens the structure of the receiver. Without tone awareness, spiritual teaching becomes blunt force. The Oversoul encodes the signature tone before incarnation, but the fragment experiences it as discovery rather than memory. This is intentional. Discovery creates ownership, while memory creates compliance. When you discover your tone through lived consequence, you trust it because it has proven itself under stress. If you were told your tone outright, you would either resist it or romanticize it. Neither produces structure. Structure forms when recognition arrives slowly and resists being named too soon. Another unspoken objection surfaces because this sounds exhausting. If tone demands coherence under pressure, does rest ever exist? The answer is that rest exists only after alignment, not before it. Rest without alignment feels like numbness. Rest after alignment feels like clarity settling into the body. The Oversoul does not design fragments for constant strain. It designs them for cycles of pressure and integration. Pressure reveals the tone. Integration stabilizes it. Skipping either produces imbalance. Signature tone also governs how integration happens after insight. Two people can reach the same realization and integrate it in completely different ways. One will immediately restructure their life to embody it. Another will sit with it, refining understanding before acting. Neither is superior. They are expressions of different tone mechanics. When people force themselves to integrate in a way that contradicts their tone, they burn out or fragment further. Integration must follow the same frequency as discovery. This brings the narrative into more dangerous territory, because it suggests that some forms of suffering persist not because healing is incomplete, but because alignment has been avoided. That statement can be weaponized, and it has been in many spiritual systems, so it must be held carefully. Avoidance here does not mean blame. It means that the fragment has prioritized stability over coherence, often for good reasons. Survival strategies are not failures. They are temporary solutions that become costly when they outlive their necessity. The Oversoul does not punish fragments for delaying tone alignment. It simply continues to present the same lesson through different configurations. When one environment fails to elicit alignment, another will eventually replace it. When one relationship allows avoidance, another will challenge it. This repetition is not cruelty, it is efficiency. The Oversoul does not generate infinite novelty when a pattern has not yet been integrated. Novelty resumes after structure forms. Signature tone also clarifies why some people feel older than their years, and others feel perpetually unfinished. Age here has nothing to do with time. It has to do with how much of the tone has been embodied. A fragment that has repeatedly chosen coherence over comfort accumulates structural density. That density reads as gravity, presence, or authority without domination. A fragment that has avoided tone alignment remains flexible but unstable, adaptable but hollow. Neither is condemned. They are simply different stages of the same process. Another objection appears because gravity and authority trigger memories of hierarchy and control. People fear becoming rigid, dogmatic, or heavy. But tone embodied does not produce rigidity. It produces precision. Precision allows movement without collapse. Rigidity resists change because it lacks internal coherence. Precision adapts because it knows what must remain intact and what can transform. The Oversoul original frequency is not about locking identity. It is about stabilizing a core so evolution does not erase coherence. Signature tone also determines how fragments relate to power. Some tones are built to hold responsibility and influence without distortion. Others are built to operate laterally, shaping systems indirectly rather than leading them. When a fragment attempts to inhabit a power configuration that contradicts its tone, corruption follows quickly, either as control or as self-erasure. This is why some people thrive in visibility, while others decay there, and why some do their best work unseen. The tone decides the optimal interface with power. At this stage, the narrative pressure increases because the implications are personal. If your tone governs coherence, then self-betrayal is not a moral failure, but a structural one. Each act of self-betrayal introduces noise into the system. Noise accumulates as fatigue, cynicism, or disorientation. People treat these states as psychological issues alone, but they are often alignment debt. The body carries the bill for decisions made against the tone long before the mind admits the cost. There is also a collective dimension that cannot be ignored. Oversouls do not incarnate fragments in isolation. They participate in shared fields, cultures, and epochs. Certain eras require certain tones to surface more frequently. Periods of collapse require integration tones. Periods of stagnation require expansion tones. Periods of excess require refinement tones. When a fragment feels chronically out of place, it is often because its tone is ahead of or behind the dominant frequency of the time. That misalignment produces friction that feels personal, but is partly historical. This reframes the idea of being early or late. It is not superiority or failure. It is placement. A fragment placed ahead of its time carries loneliness. A fragment placed behind its time carries resistance. Both positions generate valuable data for the Oversoul field. The danger comes when the fragment interprets placement as identity and builds a story of specialness or inferiority. Tone is not about story. It is about function within a larger pattern. Signature tone also shapes how fragments experience awakening. For some, awakening arrives as sudden clarity that reorganizes life quickly. For others, it arrives as slow erosion of false structures over many years. Both are valid expressions of tone. The mistake is forcing a narrative of awakening borrowed from someone else. That forces the fragment to mimic a frequency it does not carry, producing instability rather than liberation. As the episode approaches its final third, the unresolved tension sharpens. Knowing the tone changes nothing if action does not follow. Awareness without embodiment becomes another layer of avoidance. The Oversoul does not need you to name the tone correctly. It needs you to act coherently in situations where acting coherently is inconvenient. The tone reveals itself retroactively through action taken under pressure, not through contemplation. This is why signature tone cannot be fully taught. It can only be pointed at from multiple angles, until recognition clicks through lived experience. Language helps orient, but consequence confirms. The Oversoul original frequency is not something you add to your identity. It is something you stop betraying. When betrayal ends, coherence increases naturally. When coherence increases, the Oversoul field stabilizes and responds with greater support, not as reward, but as resonance alignment. The closing tension remains unresolved by design. If you accept that your Oversoul has an original frequency, then the question is no longer who am I? The question becomes, what am I willing to lose to remain coherent? Every fragment eventually faces that decision. Some choose comfort and carry the cost quietly. Some choose coherence and accept disruption openly. The Oversoul does not judge either choice. It records the outcome and builds forward from what was proven. And this is where certainty must be withheld, because the moment you believe you have fully embodied your tone, you stop listening to it. Tone continues to evolve as capacity expands. What began as resistance becomes discernment. What began as longing becomes direction. What began as friction becomes quiet authority. The Oversoul original frequency is not a destination. It is a living pattern that deepens as long as you remain willing to meet reality, without betraying what holds you together when everything else falls away. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.